Hi grade 1 teachers. In this video we're going to have a look at the organizing idea of computer science that's in your new science curriculum. First, let's talk a little bit about why we should be excited that there's computer science now included in our curriculum all the way from K through 6. We know that we're already in this period where there is a shortage of computer programmers and electrical engineers in the job field. Companies like Google and Facebook are literally hiring every programmer who walks through their doors because there just aren't enough programmers available to do all of the programming that needs to be done. We know that having skills in technology, whether it be coding and computational thinking or things to do with electrical engineering, are going to help our students no matter what it is they want to be when they grow up. There are now reasons to know about computers and technology to go into almost any career. And giving our students those skills starting very early on will give them that leg up to get better jobs in their futures. In the next slide, I'm going to show you a why that you can share with your students and why they can get excited about learning coding with something that they're definitely going to connect with. The video that's going to play has also been created with an AI presenter, which is another piece that connects and to just demonstrate how quickly technology is moving along. And if we have technology like this available today, what is the world going to look like? What technology is going to be available by the time your little grade ones reach the workforce? And bigger question is, what kind of technology are your little grade ones going to grow up and change the world with? Let's have a listen as the AI presenter tells us about Timothy Sweeney.
Once upon a time, there was an 11-year-old boy named Timothy Sweeney who loved to play video games. He was born in 1970 and grew up in Potomac, Maryland with his parents and two older brothers. When he was 11 years old, his brother gave him his first computer. It was an Apple II Plus, and Sweeney used it to program computer games. He said, "I think I spent more time programming than I think I was sleeping or in school or doing anything else in the world." When he wasn't programming, Tim would play video games to learn how they worked. He took apart lawnmowers, TVs, and radios to learn how they worked too. While Tim was going to college studying to become a computer engineer, he made his first computer game in his spare time called ZZT. In 1998, Tim's company, under its new name Epic Games, released Unreal, the first computer game ever that allowed players to play together on different computers. Along with the game came the release of the Unreal Engine, a platform for building 3D graphic games with multiplayer capabilities. This made it possible for anyone, anywhere to build these kinds of games for free. There have been 5 versions and hundreds of games have been built on it, including the highest profit game of all time, Fortnite. Across all platforms, Fortnite made over $9 billion in its first 2 years. In 2020, Epic Games reported that there were more than 350 million Fortnite user accounts created. Love it or hate it, you know it. From an 11-year-old kid with a dream to one of the richest people in the world. What will your dream be?
And indeed, what will your students' dreams be? This I find to be a very inspirational story. It's a great way to show kids that they can start to do something and get excited about it now, and where it might lead them in their future to somewhere like Tim Sweeney to be impacting millions of people around the world with what he created.
Once upon a time.
You are definitely already familiar, I'm sure, with the overall structure of the new curriculum and how each subject is set out by organizing ideas. So in your science, we have a number of organizing ideas that are consistent all the way from kindergarten through grade 6. one of those, of course, being computer sciences. So the computer science organizing idea, this is for all of the grades from kindergarten through grade 6, is talking about problem solving and scientific inquiry being developed through the knowledgeable application of creativity, design, and computational thinking. And then at each grade level, we have a learning outcome that tells us specifically what it is about that organizing idea that we're expected to learn. And we see the word instructions coming up a lot in the lower grades, and we start to see the creativity and design and computational thinking, and then the connections to machines as we're moving up into the older elementary grades. So in grade 1, you only need to fill that gap for kindergarten, but it's also important just to see where these learning outcomes are going, moving into the older grades as well. So looking at this organizing idea, we see jumping out problem solving, scientific inquiry. They've led off with these. We know this is going to be a really important piece that's going to be a common thread all the way from kindergarten up through grade 6. And while these are computer science curriculum we're talking about, and this is where we're seeing these words, problem solving for sure comes into play in all areas of life. Scientific inquiry definitely applies to your other science units and any type of inquiry that you may be doing, and those skills could be applied. And then we also see the creativity, design, and computational thinking are huge pieces. Look at how big the word design is in this word bubble of the computer sciences curriculum. So just a real visual shows you how important computational, creativity, design, 3 of the most prominent words in this cloud, are definitely here at this top level. We know those are going to be consistent from kindergarten up through grade 6. So it's important that you as teachers have a good solid understanding of what each of these are. And we'll have a look at some of those close up and how you can understand, and also how you can teach these concepts to your students in language and ways that they will understand. So again, just that graphic of those outcomes and how they're feeding into each other. We see this instructions here in kindergarten, and then by the time we get up to grade 6, we are creating and refining computational artifacts. And this will all begin in kindergarten with some simple ways of just embedding this into your classroom routines, and then teaching your students about some of that coding and computational language as well. The specific learning outcome for kindergarten, this will be the one that you're going to be filling that gap this first year, is that children interpret instructions in the learning environment. And then in grade 2, they are starting to learn to apply creativity in designing instructions to achieve a desired outcome. So we're moving from understanding and following instructions, understanding how instructions can influence actions, and then we're moving into creating instructions in the next grade. So just to give you an idea of where students are expected to have been as far as computer science goes when they hit grade 1, and then also where they're expected to be going in the next year in their computer sciences as well. Now let's go ahead and hone in on your outcome, which is that students investigate instructions and their influence on actions and outcomes. So this is already assuming that students understand what instructions are and how to follow them, and they learn them in their or interpret them in their learning environment. While your outcome is talking really just specifically about instructions, we don't want to lose sight of the organizing idea and those big concepts that are in there, and students are expected to be familiar with and understand by the time they reach the end of grade 6. So the first is creative thinking, and we're talking about creative thinking as far as it pertains to science experiments and learning about the world. We're talking about finding different ways to solve problems. How can we reach the same destination by taking a different path? Is there a different way that we can look at this problem and think of how to solve it differently from the way we were solving it previously, or perhaps in a way to solve it in a way that didn't work when we tried something previously. So, this process of creative thinking really connects heavily into the design thinking model and how we need to test something. And when it doesn't work, we need to creatively go back and look at something in our design or our plan or our project, figure out what that issue is, and use creative thinking to find another way to get to the desired outcome. So this is a huge piece of being an inventor, and much of this computer science curriculum talks about creating artifacts, talks about being creative and finding solutions to problems, and how technology helps us solve problems, and how people who invent with technology are very creative thinkers. We also have, of course, the next big piece, which is the design thinking piece. And design thinking, of course, is the process followed when we want to create a product that is for some people. And at grade 1, we are likely not going to be teaching explicitly the design thinking process, but it still is important for you as a teacher to remember that the end goal, when they hit grade 4 and grade 5, they are going to be expected to understand what the design thinking process is. So anytime that we can use it with our students and embed the skills that are a part of the design thinking process, we're going to be helping build that foundation for those later grades too. So again, you're not going to pull out this model and teach design thinking to grade 1s, but you might hone in and focus on a particular piece of it and start to work with that language and what those skills look like. And we'll have a look in a little bit about how you can teach your students about empathy with a fun activity. It's also a STEM activity that will get their creative thinking processes going. And honestly, the earlier we can start teaching students about what empathy is, not only as it relates to the design thinking process, but as how it relates to us as human beings, this is a really good thing. So if we have an opportunity to just talk about putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, we can start just building those small building blocks that are going to help students understand this big process, which is actually a very big thing for them to understand, even at the grade that they're being asked to understand it. And again, any of the other pieces, brainstorming. What are we doing? We're brainstorming. What is brainstorming? Just having that conversation with the students about what you're doing while you're doing a brainstorming activity, you're going to be giving them these design thinking skills along the way as well. So this and the next few slides in the presentation are ways that you can understand the design process and how you might be able to cover parts of it in a more kid-friendly way. So there's just a collection of some videos and some ideas that you could work through these different steps if you wanted to actually teach your students about the design process, or if you just want to use different pieces of it to, again, give them those skills so that they have them when they're expected to really understand the design process in later grades. So those are there, available in the slides for you to definitely check out. I always like to refer to the Wright brothers and have a conversation with students about what might have happened after their first unsuccessful attempt at flying had they given up. And that leads into great conversations about how engineers and inventors and designers and creators of things often have to come up with a plan and test it out, and then they have to continue this loop and keep going back to the drawing board. And our students aren't inherently able to fail very easily, and we really need to work with them on that. It's the hardest part of the design process for them, or of any scientific inquiry or creation of things. Getting students to go back and fix, to look at errors and to try and reiterate, make something better is really hard. They don't take failure well. And a huge piece of computer science design thinking is that you have to be okay with failing. That all good engineers and inventors failed at some point in time, and that is where really good things came from. So Again, anytime you have a chance, just encourage your students to go through that process, do some STEM activities that are designed to create some failure, to help them learn about this piece. Those are going to really help students again with this as they get into the older grades and are expected to apply the design process to their learning. I'm going to share with you now an activity that I have done a lot of times with grade 5 and 6 classes when I'm doing STEAM camps with them. I find students right up to big old teenagers and sometimes even adults don't always understand what empathy means. So we will watch a video. I tell the students, I'm going to tell you now ahead of time that in the video that we're about to watch, we're going to meet our audience. So as you're watching the video, I want you to start to think about what our audience needs and also be prepared to talk about how you feel. And we'd have some guiding questions. How would you feel in Mandy's position? What kind of person does Mandy seem like? And what qualities does the video show you about Mandy? So have the students, before watching the video, prime them that, we're going to brainstorm and be inventors and come up with something for this person in this video. And we're going to use our design skills to do this. And then we're going to show them this video.
Okay, Mandy, so I think I've worked this out. So you're deaf?
Yes, I lost all my hearing when I was 18 years old.
Wow. And how old are you now?
29. So it's 10 years.
Wow. And Mandy, how did you lose your hearing, if you don't mind me asking?
I have a connective tissue disorder, so basically I got sick and my nerves deteriorated.
Growing up, the only thing I wanted to do was sing. I ended up going to school for vocal music education so that I could have that be my life. When I was in college, I thought I had an ear infection, and it just got worse and worse. And by Christmas, I was borderline legally deaf in both ears. There was one day where the teacher was going to play the piano, and I had to chart out everything that he was playing. And I had my pencil ready, and everybody else's pencils start moving, and I'm just waiting for the test to start. And then one by one, every person just got up and left the room. And I didn't hear enough to even start the test. That was the last day I was a part of music program. That was a bad day.
We were sitting in the car together to come home. She said, "Dad, I can't remember what your voice sounds like anymore." At that moment, you knew that things would never be the same.
Everything that I had ever wanted was just going away, and I couldn't stop it.
The music is alive inside of her. The only question was, what could she do with it now?
My dad, he suggested that we play a song. I said, well, that's crazy. But I had a guitar tuner, and I hummed my starting note and just went for it. Music now isn't about the sound, it's about the feeling.
I'm excited, I'm nervous, I'm scared, so I'm just trying to...
It's not the dream that I always had. That's okay, because I showed up, and I did something I never believed I could do.
So you were singing before you lost your hearing?
Yeah, I've been singing since I was 4. So I left music after I lost my hearing and then figured out how to get back into singing with muscle memory, using visual tuners and trusting my pitch.
So your shoes are off because you're feeling the vibration. Is that how you're following the music?
Yeah, I'm feeling the tempo, the beat through the floor.
And Mandy, what are you going to sing?
I'm gonna sing a song that I wrote called Try.
Okay, can you tell me what it's about?
After I lost my hearing, I gave up but I want to do more with my life than just give up. So.
Good for you. Good for you. Okay, well, look, this is your moment, and good luck.
Okay. I don't feel the way I used to. The sky is gray, much more than it is blue. But I know one day I'll get through, and I'll take my place again if I would try. If I would try. Oh, there is no one for me to blame, 'cause I know the only thing in my way is me. I don't live the way I want to. That whole picture never came into view. But I'm tired of getting used to the day. So I will try. So I will try. If I would try. If I would try.
Mandy, I don't think you're going to need a translator for this.
And every time I've showed that video to a class, I have had bits of empathy rolling down my face, which makes it a really real way to show students what empathy is. So you can have a conversation, and you might even stop the video at certain points along the way. And so after, that biography part at the beginning when Mandy's talking about her disability and her life and what's happened, and you could stop and ask the students these questions that we saw in the previous slide. What kind of person do you think Mandy is, and how would you feel if you were Mandy? And maybe we even lead into, well, who loves to sing? Well, maybe you don't love to sing. What do you love to do? And how would you feel if something happened and you couldn't do that thing anymore? And then we watch the video and we see it escalate right to the point where we're celebrating. How did you feel when Simon hit the golden buzzer? And maybe you were like me and you had actual tears. That's because you're feeling what Mandy was feeling in that moment, and understanding how someone else feels. That's what empathy is. And to be an inventor or a designer or a creator, you have to understand the person that you're going to be creating or inventing something for. So our task for Mandy is to think of something that's going to help her with her problem. And then I would work through students with talking about that her problem is not that she's deaf. Yes, that is certainly something that is inhibiting her, but it's an impairment that cannot be fixed. And Mandy has perseverance, and she's a creative thinker, and she's figured out a way to keep singing even though she can't hear by feeling the sound vibrations through the floor, and she has to sing in her stocking feet. What can we do to help Mandy solve that she has to always sing in her socks? Could we help her wear shoes? Would be where I'm leading the students. And over the years that I did this with grade 5 and 6 students, I saw them come up with the most amazingly creative ways and ideas for how they would help Mandy sense the vibrations of the sound without having to wear no shoes. We saw shoes without soles, so very low tech ideas where she would still be just using her foot, but the shoe would be built in such a way that her foot could feel through the bottom, to really highly technological ideas of special sensors that maybe couldn't be invented today. But what I saw in those students was an excitement and a potential that they could grow up and change the world in those kind of ways. So this was a really effective lesson for teaching students about empathy that I wanted to share with you, so that you could take that back and possibly use it with your students if you wanted to. And if nothing else, just saw a lovely video about a lovely girl. And now our last big piece of the organizing idea for the computer science is the biggest one, the most intimidating, that we are maybe not as familiar with as teachers as the other things that we have talked about previously in this video. So I'm going to break computational thinking down at a really grade 1 level for you. Again, while it doesn't state in your curriculum that you need to be teaching students what computational thinking is, it does state that in the later on grades of computer sciences. So any of the skills, language, knowledge that you can be giving them starting right away in grade 1 that are connected to computational thinking are just going to help them out, and also give them those skills to be future inventors and creative thinkers. So computational thinking, depending on where you look, you may see a variation of what the different components and parts of computational thinking are. We're going to use these four as our basis for talking about computational thinking in this video. And I'll also refer to computational thinking in the connections videos that are coming along with your other science units. So you can find those videos in those folders as well for the matter and the living systems and the other science units. We have some connections videos that connect computer sciences into those units, and in there we'll always refer to computational thinking in this way. So let's have a look at what these different pieces of computational thinking are, and how you're really already doing things in your classroom that are completely connected to this, even though you might not know that's what they're doing or be overtly connecting it to a computer science topic. You're definitely doing some of these things. So the first piece in computational thinking is decomposition, breaking something down into its smallest parts. This could mean taking a problem that we're trying to solve and breaking it down to find what is the heart of that problem and what all of the pieces are. This can be talking about a set of instructions that we're following as a classroom routine, or as a set of instructions in a lesson within our classes. This is a really nice way that you can break it down for your students in something that they understand very explicitly, like ice cream sundae. So if we take, this thing, we have an ice cream sundae. Well, what are all of the different parts of this? How can we break this thing down into its different parts? What's all in there? And once I'm starting to look at all of the different parts, now I can move forward into breaking this, solving this problem, or putting this together in a way that makes sense, or to achieve that sundae at the end of it. When we start to talk into the next piece, which is pattern recognition, and that's where we're recognizing what is the same and what is different. How can we maybe formulate and move towards creating some rules, which comes along further in computational thinking. So again, with our ice cream sundae example, if we have decomposed the ice cream sundae and determined what all of those different parts are, we can now start to talk about the different ingredients or the different parts and how they are the same, or how they're different, and maybe we could sort them into a couple of different categories. And these ingredients you pour, and these ones need to be scooped. We're going to need that other part, that other piece, that ice cream scoop. So even we don't see that in the sundae, we recognize that that is a piece of making a sundae, and it's required to do all of those things that need to be, say, scooped. So this is a really simple connection to pattern recognition. When you're doing any type of sorting and grouping where you're looking at attributes of something, you're going to be decomposing because you're looking at specific attributes. If we're dividing numbers into odd and even, then it doesn't really matter what the number is or which one's higher or lower. It really just matters if it's divisible by 2. And that's the only part of the number that we're looking at. So we've thrown everything else away, and then we might notice the pattern that, oh, it's every other number as we're counting up the way that we know how to count. So pattern recognition happens all of the time. We're doing this explicitly in math 100%, and you're asking students to do this when they're following instructions and applying them to other situations as well. Moving further into pattern abstraction, this is now we've defined that we have a pattern. Some of our things can be poured and some of our things need to be scooped. And how can we take and apply this into other situations? Abstracting is pulling out that one key piece, focusing just on that, and then being able to apply it universally across other, in this case, objects. So we could ask students, well, what are some other things that you pour? And maybe we come up with things that we eat. Maybe we come up with a bunch of things we don't eat too, because essentially there are definitely a lot of things that can be poured. And then of course the same with the scoop. So just working through a simple activity. We don't necessarily have to use these terms, pattern abstraction, with the students, but just having them practice those skills and work on those thinking skills, again, is going to give them the computational thinking skills that they are required to understand really well in an older grade. We can go further and talk about, anything that can be broken down into parts. Ask the students, well, what else could we decompose like this? And we might make that connection to how recipes are a set of instructions that we follow. And a set of instructions that we follow is our outcome for grade 1 computer science. So there's like really easy ways that you can connect this into things that the students are already familiar with. How do we look at something, figure out what it is, break it down, so then we can figure out how to put it back together? The last piece, the algorithm design, that is that building of the rule or the set of instructions. So your computer science curriculum does not talk about algorithm design or coding, but it is implied through the computational thinking and the larger organizing idea. So if you can include words like algorithm with your students when you're talking about instructions, again, you're just building those skills that they're going to need at higher levels. It does not hurt to introduce them to coding language early on, and to introduce them to algorithm design as early as you can. Your students are doing algorithms from the time they walk into kindergarten when they're following sets of instructions. It's just putting that language to it. So if we ask students, can we design a set of instructions for how you build sundae? And then as you can see here in my example, I've pushed the envelope just a little bit further to just bring in some of that coding language. So we might not normally say, if it is closed, then open it. But that's where I can bring in, without even saying, oh, we're going to learn about conditionals today, grade 1s. We just start to frame up that language. Step 1, gather the ingredients. If it is closed, then open it, because we know we need to tell our friend who's never made a sundae every single step. And we can have conversations about, well, do you think a machine could follow this? Do you think a robot would be able to follow your instructions? Are they explicit enough? And then just again, using just a little if then statement here and there is going to really give your students some foundational skills and help them excel at computer science further on, and learn those algorithm design. just by simply learning how to place instructions. I have 3 different copies of a really cute poster that a colleague shared with me. I really love this just in regards to being a scientist. I think it connects to the computational thinking and definitely the design thinking piece that we have covered, and of course creative thinking too. So I think this is something you could definitely post for your students and talk about how we want to be brave and take chances. That connects to being okay with failure and having a curious mind and thinking deeply about the world, and that's our creative thinking. So this is just a how to be a all the different parts of a scientist. There are actually just 3 different versions for your selection, and a great way to just teach your students not just computer science scientist skills, but scientist skills overall, and to connect into some of these things that we have been talking about so far along in this video. Finally, jumping into the cusps of your computer science curriculum. You can see here I've highlighted some words that come up a whole lot. We see instructions over and over again. Outcome is there many times. We want students to have the understanding that how you get instructions might not change how things are done, and that the order instructions are in does affect the outcome and how it can. And there's also a piece about how instructions are made to keep people safe, which is really easy for you to cover when you're doing things like, what do we do when we have a fire drill? Let's look at some of the skills and procedures specifically, and some really specific ways that you can teach these to your students. Before I do that, though, I am going to bring up my kid bots. If you've watched other videos of mine, or if you jump into some of the computer science connections videos for your other computer science units, you'll find that my kid bot pops up quite often. If I was to be teaching computer science to young students, I would definitely be talking a lot about how computers and robots are taught instructions in much the same way that I, as their teacher, have given them instructions. And you can say, ask them any of the routines that they already know how to do. Students, what happens when the recess bell goes? And guaranteed they can tell you. I take off my inside shoes, I put my lunch back in my locker, whatever. And they know those steps. And see? Just like my robots, you are programmed to do something. We can program computers and machines in the same way that we can give people's instructions. So if you use that kind of language, kids, what's the algorithm for finishing your math work? What's the algorithm for a fire drill? You're going to help them learn this computer science thing, also be covering classroom routines and things that you're doing anyways, and having some fun referring to them as your little robots. The first skill we see in the cusps is following instructions with 2 or 3 steps given in different forms. So I've just thrown up on this slide a grid. I would use this kind of grid to teach coding to everybody from K through 6. I'm going to have more squares when we're getting up into older grades. So just anything that can be cut into squares. This can be something on a piece of paper. This can be tiles on the floor. This can be old checkerboards with tiny McDonald's toys. In this case, I'm using, digital. We've got a grid. I've got some simple arrows because we're just talking about simple movement. And I can ask my students, what can you put the arrows in a way that would help the bee get to the flower and then to his home, or just to the flower, or just to his home. It's really only asking for 2 or 3 steps, so that's not overly complicated. Now, if I went to, okay, students, we've done it with the arrows. Can you think of another way to give someone those instructions? And maybe we're going to do it out loud. Can you tell someone, go to the right, move up, move to the left, etc.? Could we come up with a hand signal for those instructions? And now show me how the bee gets there with your hands, and we work through that. So this would be easily covered with something like this that's actually a physical thing. It could also easily be covered, as I say, with just the floor tiles in your room, whiteboard, drawing some arrows on the whiteboard with your markers, and then having these conversations, because it's just asking students to understand that we might get steps that are written out in words, and we might have steps like this with the arrows, and we might get instructions that are hand signals, or when the bell goes, and what are all of the different things that could tell us to do the same set of instructions. And we've hit this outcome easily. Determining if instructions with 2 or 3 steps given in a different order will still get the same result. So again, just building on to the same activity that we've just been looking at with the little bee, we could ask students to design, 2 different paths. We could show them a path. Oh, does this get him there? Well, it sure does. If we were doing the activity from the previous slide, and we had students work individually to put out the arrows and then start to compare with partners, they probably wouldn't have to go very far before they found someone who did in fact have a different algorithm than them. So having those students get together and discuss, well, who's right? And, well, geez, we're both right, because we get the end goal. The goal was the bee needed to get to the flower and then home. And the steps he takes to get there really doesn't matter. And there might be, after these 2 students get together and compare and learn that, in fact, they are both right, now maybe we challenge them to see if they can find another way that the bee could go that's a third way. And we're really, really digging deep into figuring out that sometimes instructions, there might be different ways to get to a different path. And there is that creativity piece, even though we don't see creative thinking coming up in the wording here at all. We're also going to ask students to sequence 2 or 3 instruction steps to achieve a desired outcome. Again, this activity with the arrows is really simple. Using a grid on the floor with our bodies moving around. If you could meet this skill right here just simply by teaching students how to follow the grids on the floor with a set of arrows on the board. Asking them to repeat back. You'll see my little kid bot here talking at us on this page, asking students to list the instructions that are 2 or 3 steps long for anything that they're asked to do. And what are the instructions at the end of the day? What do you do at lunchtime? Can you tell me the 3 steps before you eat your lunch? You're asking students to do this computer science skill right here. We want to ask students to exchange ideas for creating 3-step instructions that achieve a desired outcome. So as I was mentioning about finding a partner who had a different plan earlier, asking them to work together to create another set of instructions to get the same outcome would certainly achieve this, or show that they know this skill as well. So all of these skills and procedures easily tied together with just a simple activity with a few items and some square grid spaces that allow us to build those motion algorithms. When you are doing your scientific investigations in your other science units, when you're teaching students about patterning in math, when you're giving them sets of instructions, anytime that you can include the computer science language, talk about algorithms when you're giving steps. Have students practice those skills, as I say, giving back a set of instructions. Maybe the students aren't even aware that they're also doing computer science when they tell me the steps for completing the experiment or the project that we're doing in matter. When we're working with instructions, we have a lot of leeway to have the students doing this continually throughout their days, and it's really, really going to cement in for them. And then again, as I've mentioned many, many times, help them learn those skills for the older grades when this stuff becomes more explicit for them. The last piece I want to about is how you can teach coding specifically to your students. Again, not in your curriculum explicitly as coding, but I am a huge advocate that we want to teach students coding as early as possible. We know that learning coding language and how coding works is as easy as learning to read or write another written or spoken language, and that happens easiest for us the younger that we are. So I highly encourage you to use the coding language, get your students doing some coding, even if it's just unplugged physical coding in the classroom, like I'm going to show you in the sample lesson in a moment. I like to tell students right away, even from kindergarten on, when we roll out our division STEAM equipment, we tell kindergarten kids that coding is the language that computers and robots understand, and that human invented the language, and humans using computer language can make computers and robots do whatever they want. We would talk about how there is computer coding in almost everything that we see these days. Everything from our vehicles to our appliances, our TVs, as well as, of course, fancy technological devices like drones and smartwatches. Everything has little bits of computer coding in it. Some person somewhere programmed that thing to do something. And huge connection to also robots. I like talking with students about robots and asking them what do they picture when they think of a robot, and they really often end up in, the fiction world, cartoon type robots, things they've seen in movies, maybe Transformers. And then I like to bring them in and show them all of these robots that are real working robots that have really important jobs, like cleaning air vents, and one of that spinning one down on the bottom is like a police robot, and the one next to him is the one that they send in to deal with something when they think there might be a bomb somewhere. And then we've even got just above that amazing robot that does surgery at the hands of a really skilled surgeon. And we can talk about just that case right there, and how if you can be a surgeon, that's an amazing job, but some surgeon who also knows a lot about computers gets to do operations now with this really cool robot. And those things that kind of look like rooms over there on the other side, well, hey, those milk cows, and they really help farmers out because it tests the cow's milk all the time to make sure that the cows are healthy and they're getting everything they need. And now I've got my students really excited, and they want to know what coding is, and then we break it down really simply for them. I think us as adults, and sometimes the kids too, we think coding looks a little bit like this scene from A Beautiful Mind, but it's really, really much simpler than that. So here is the 5 things you need to know to start your learning journey and begin being a coder. And this is for you as a teacher and also as students. Algorithms. Everything in coding is based on algorithms. We associate algorithms possibly with math and equations, but really an algorithm is just a set of instructions to be followed, especially by a computer. I mentioned earlier in this video about recipes. Recipes are algorithms that we follow. If you don't follow it in the right order, your stuff doesn't turn out. They're a great analogy to connect to what an algorithm is. We want to know what a loop is. We are going to have a look at an example of that in just a minute. And then events, inputs, and outputs. The event, that's what starts the algorithm. The input, that's those instructions. And then the output, that's what the robot or the machine does. So really, really basic. This is your computer science vocabulary that applies for you and your students. Let's have a look at what these things really mean. So here is a set of instructions our students should be really familiar with. We can start by saying, how would you tell a machine or a robot to brush their teeth? And we can talk about, what order the steps need to be in. Maybe I have these on cards and I actually have the students order them, and we work at that piece. And now we're, putting instructions in order, and we're also building an algorithm, and we're connecting to something that we really know. And once I've made them understand what an algorithm is and how they already know algorithms, now we're going to move further. So I'm going to teach you how you can be a programmer by programming you. So we know that for any algorithm to start, we need an event. And I've done this with an actual physical remote control. You can just use start as an event. So our event that will start our algorithm, and I'm going to say our, but I'm the programmer and you're the robots. So your event will be the word start. And then I'm going to show you our language. So your language is that when you see the letter R, you're going to stomp your right foot. And when you see the letter L, you're going to stomp your left foot. If you see an H, you're going to clap your hands. So you, my little robots, have a very simple language. You have just these 3 letters that you need to know. So once again, of course, we'd repeat this, make sure the students understand. We'd practice our stomp and our clap and make sure they understand that it's only one time. And then we're going to go ahead and put up this algorithm, and inevitably you will put the algorithm up and somebody's going to start moving. And then we're going to remind them, wait, remember, the robot or the machine can't do what we've asked it until we give it the start command. All right, boys and girls, start. And then we work this algorithm. So we're going to build it really slowly together. And the kids are going to have lots of fun stomping and clapping their hands for you. And we'll make the algorithm more complicated. And every time we're going to ask them, of course, to start. And now that we understand the basic steps of the language, we're going to talk about what a loop is. And I'll explain that when you see this around, that means you're going to repeat something. So when we see the L and the H in here, we're going to repeat this 3 times. And I'm going to give you the command, and we're going to repeat this 3 times. And then I'm going to talk about what a forever loop is. And that means that you're going to repeat something forever. And in this case, we're going to repeat, left stomp, clap, forever, start. And we're going to do this as a class. And then we're going to talk about how, now we started a forever loop. That means we might need another event that's a stop. When I say stop, you stop. Or when I hold up my hand, you say stop. And we'll work this as a forever motion. And then I'm going to lead to my big fun climax. We're going to run this forever loop, and I'm going to get the whole class following this pattern. And if they get in tune with each other, even better. And then we could jump ahead and play a little song for them and let them know that they've created some rhythm. I also at this point would have a conversation with the students. Likely they got in sync with each other, as Queen does, with their stomping and clapping. And then we would talk about how if I taught this to a room full of robots and they all started at a different time, do you think they would have ended up in sync with each other like that? And they certainly wouldn't have. And that is what makes our sentient human brains much, much more powerful than a computer or a robot brain, because you listened to what was going on around you and you adapted to it and you got in sync with it. And while we know that AI and machine learning probably means that those robots could indeed eventually learn to get in sync with each other too, for our purposes at grade 1, it's a really good way to show students how the machines have limitations that the human brain does not have. And again, let the song play a little bit, and it'll have them a little bit of fun, and then we can throw up that stop command to stop all of the stomping and clapping. We've definitely understood our loop, and at a very low level, there is some coding that you've embedded right into your stuff. Your kids are going to thank you for it when they grow up to be computer engineers. No tech, no problem. I mentioned the floor tiles in your room and how anything that's chopped up into a grid like this can be used to work on those putting sets of instructions together. We can write instructions. We can have some arrows printed out on little cards. We could have the students putting this on their little whiteboards. However, we've got them working with these squares and just talking about all of the steps that take to get there and how we put those in order. Then we're going to be doing that algorithmic thinking, definitely meaning those CS skills and procedures. If you have students doing anything like Sudoku, doing a coded drawing, Google that up. It's a really fun activity where you have students try and tell you how to draw something. grade 1, I would 100% start on the board. Can someone tell me how to draw a square? And then make them give you really literal specific instructions, and they say draw a line, and then they say draw another line, and you draw it way off, and have them talk you through that process. No code, no tech, no materials except your good old whiteboard needed, and you can work through this with your students. If they are coding math counting or equations, you're doing things in math, ask them to design an algorithm. How would you put this for a machine so it could do it? I Spy and guessing games, that's got us doing computational thinking. We're abstracting and decomposing and looking at things closer and defining certain attributes. Doing coding a friend or a family member or a teacher. Give me a set of instructions to get to the light switch and turn the lights off. Putting some things down on the floor tiles and coding your parent at a student-led conference to get from point A over to the chocolate bar on the table maybe, or just from point A to point B. So anytime we ask students to just create a set of instructions, and I think the big piece would be not giving an instruction one at a time, right? We're actually creating that whole algorithm, giving it to our family member, a classmate, or teacher, a machine, and then it's done in such a way that the machine can follow it through without us having to intervene anymore. And hand signals and actions, you put your hand up and your students all stop, that is an algorithm that you've taught them. You're just naturally embedding that stuff. Tech, of course, tech has its place when we're learning about coding and computational thinking. There are some really great websites that are free. Code.org has some great videos and resources that will help you with your own learning about what coding and computational thinking means in the younger grades. For grade 1, you could look at some of the Block League games. There may be some reading required for some of these that's a little above your guys. Tinker has some great free activities. So they have a paid version, but their free version has some fantastic beginner activities, pre-reader things that students can start to build those coding skills without having to read. Same with code.org. They've got fully designed curriculum and step-by-step lessons that you can share with your students in Google Classroom on a Chromebook, and they can just follow through, listen to the instructions, and play those games, and then also be learning about coding. And if you really have some keeners, they can even jump in and start doing a little bit with Scratch. Again, there's a bit of reading involved in Scratch, but you would be amazed at what your students can learn to do, especially if they get excited about this. In addition to being able to do things on the Chromebooks, of course, there's a whole world of robotics and educational toys that are out there to help students learn these things as well. And an advantage you have as a teacher here in Alberta is that our ATA library has a huge selection of maker kits that you are able to borrow. The process is really simple. You just have to be logged into the ATA site with your proper credentials, the same that you would use to access the new Learn Alberta resources. The maker kits themselves are held on the legacy ATA site, so it looks a little bit different when you get there. You can see a screenshot here. There are so many of them that you have to go by alphabet to look at what's there. I highly recommend checking them out. I've had some teachers here in Wetaskiwin Regional sign them out. They get shipped to you at the school. Everything you need is there. You just use them, put them in the box, they get sent back. A really great way to try out some different robotics and toys, learning toys in your classroom before you commit to purchasing. Just a great thing that not lots of teachers know about. So wanted to make sure that you know about that. If you're going to be looking at some purchasing, maybe you've got some curriculum money available and you'll be able to get some resources for your classroom. My number one recommendation for the little guys, and when I say little guys, I think there's value in B-Bots from kindergarten right up through grade 3, especially if students have not been exposed to little robots like this before. Their price point is definitely a little bit high. We've had some of these though traveling around our schools for 6-7 years, and they are all still working really well. So they're a durable little guy. There's a lot of mats and different activities that can go along with them, but they also just work really well on your square tile floor or somewhere that you can find just that right grid size for them to drive around on. So highly recommend the Bebots. We've had huge success with those. My favorite for moving up, you could start with the Code and Go mouse honestly as early as kindergarten as well. Definitely as we're getting up into the older grades, the Code and Go mouse offers a little bit more learning. It has some more complicated actions, and the students are able to build the little mazes and use some of the other elements to create obstacles and things for him. There's coding cards to be laid out, and then they also have some other expansion packs. So there's like a math expansion pack. There's a Mouse Mania board game that students can play to practice those skills. Its price point, in my opinion, is one of the very best for your value as a classroom material. And same thing, we've had some of these going around for a few years, and they've been pretty durable and resilient and kid friendly. We also have some Botleys in our division that we're finding that the little guys really like. So we've got these in grade 2. They'd certainly be usable in grade 1 as well. The programming on these little robots happens on a tiny remote control. So that is another different way for your kids to connect. And they all run on the same ideas. We're looking at, those arrows. So what I was showing you with the bee on the grid earlier, if you have some of these little robots available to your students, they run on the exact same principles of moving so many arrows forward and turning and moving so many arrows that way. And so you could have some really great computer science centers. So you don't need to have robots for your whole class, but this is where you could have maybe, that mouse game some of the kids are playing, and you have a little center with some robots, and some of the kids are doing something on a Chromebook, and then another group of kids are actually coding each other through an activity. So that would be a really great way that you could incorporate some robotics and make sure all of your students have a chance to use without having to have a whole set for your class too. So that is the end of what I have to share about grade 1 computer science. It was certainly a lot, and I really hope you enjoyed and you have fun incorporating computer science into your grade 1 classroom next year.